And let's do a slideshow here. Everybody seeing that? Colby?
Yep, looks good to me. Sorry, I was talking on mute there.
All right.
I see it.
Great. All right, everyone. Welcome to this session of Out of Sight Tactical Privacy. I'm Jeff Jockisch with ObscureIQ. I've got with me Colby Scullion as our primary guest. Amanda may jump in a little bit as well. Colby, you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah, guys, hi. If I don't know you, it's a pleasure. I'm the CEO of ObscureIQ. Jeff and I, we've been business partners for a number of years now, and he is, obviously one of the world's foremost privacy experts. And then I'm the guy I'm the OSINT guy who tries to exploit any type of any type of privacy issue we can find to really just to help better protect our clients. So it's actually a pretty unique. Thing we have going between us two. But a pleasure, everybody.
Great. Thanks, Colby. And we'll introduce Amanda if she jumps in later. But let's sort of get rolling here. We have this sort of intro screen that we just sort of walked through. Also, if you don't know, one of the things that ObscureIQ is a little bit different that sort of sets us apart is we actually do a lot of base privacy research, including creating a codex of commercial surveillors, or really data brokers, but it's a broader definition of data brokers than the legal definition, and where we track 8,600 organizations that are collecting profiles on consumers. We think it's the largest and deepest data set of categorized, tagged, and scored commercial surveillors in existence. And it's pretty provocative, very helpful in our ability to delete the information of our clients and really to sort of move the understanding of the data broker ecosystem forward. So it's very helpful. And if you're interested in that, let us know. We can share some information about that to you. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk mostly about tactical privacy. We do need to give you a little bit of a background about what that means in order for you to best understand what you're doing with that tactical privacy and where you need to focus. So to start out, we're going to talk a little bit about one specific use case, and that's the Matthew Leibelsberger situation. He's the guy that blew up his Cybertruck on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day.
New Year's Day.
Yeah, New Year's Day. And we did a little bit of research on that as the event sort of unfolded. Colby did. And we were one of the first companies to put some information about that out, both to the public and to law enforcement. And so we've got a little bit of insight there. And Colby's going to walk you through that. So why don't you go ahead and take that away, Colby?
Yeah, absolutely, guys. So let me first start off with just a little bit of a background. So the reason that this kind of got a lot of internet interest really was because of an email that Matthew Leibelsberger had sent out to Sean Ryan, the Sean Ryan Show, and also Sam Shoemate. They got together and did an emergency podcast. And they read the email that was, Jeff, this is good here. But they read the email that was sent out to that show. And the email said a variety of kind of, very, provocative things, such as just talking about certain types of assets that the U.S. Air Force has and what have you, and also some war crimes that he was saying that he participated in. And so there were a lot of folks online who were really heavily questioning if this was true or not. So what Sean Ryan did on his Twitter account, he actually shared the email address and the full email that was sent to Sam Shoemate. And so I decided, okay, let's actually validate if this is Matthew Leibelsberger who was sending this. So I first utilized, I was utilizing a variety of different OSINT tools and variety of different OSINT tools and just methodologies, where I ran a query on the Proton Mail email address. And when hey Jeff, can you open the PDF here? It might be a little bit easier to walk through that. Yeah, so yeah, yeah, if you can go up. But yeah, so what I did was I ran the email address in a very inexpensive OSINT tool called OSINT Industries. And one thing I was able to find, able to find a variety of different things. I was able to actually find that he has a phone number hint that ends in 84. And then additionally, I was also able to see that he has an account on the Tesla app. So that does say something there. The next thing I wanted to do was like, okay, well, hey, what's the rest of that phone number? I'm really curious. So I went to, I think it was like a Free People Search website. I don't know if it was True People Search or whatnot. And I typed in his name and I got the actual full phone number. So from that full phone number, I ran another query in OSINT Industries. And again, these queries are fairly cheap. And I was able to get something really interesting here. I was able to get an email hint. And that email hint right there was consistent with the actual full email address that was provided by Sean Ryan and Sam Shoemate on Twitter. So we also here can see that we also found, oh, hey, there is also another Gmail address that would be interesting to look into. So what I did was I went back to the People Search site. Again, this was completely free. I did not pay for any of that. And found his Gmail address. So I then took that, I ran that, and was able to get a little bit of additional information. Again, we were also able to tie that number ending in 84 to him again. And yeah, we were able, and through this process, I know this is very fast that I went through this, right? But we were able to positively identify that, yes, this email address did belong to Matthew Livelsberger. Why is that important? It's because very quick and easy workflows like that can help a bad actor identify somebody who that they are trying to get to. What we try to do at ObscureIQ is actually protect against these types of methodologies and tool sets. But in order to do that, we actually have to replicate it ourselves prior to trying to protect against that. But yeah, this is just a really small piece here of what can be done from an OSINT perspective that can really, that can really invade your privacy and put you in danger.
Yep. So if we, to sort of wrap that up, right? One of the things that really happens is that your data aggregates around different pieces of information like your email addresses and your phone numbers. And they aggregate around that based upon how data brokers collect their information. So in order to sort of combat that, you have to either start changing up your email addresses and phone numbers, or you have to break the chain, right? You have to actually get data brokers to delete that information, break the connection between like your public records and your the information that the data brokers have. Otherwise, Colby and people like him or bad actors can actually just make those connections very quickly and figure out who you are, where you live, what you do, those types of things. So let's take a little bit step back a little bit. How do we actually get to here, right? So originally, right, cavemen really had sort of like no concept of privacy at all, right? And then around sort of the 1900s, we started to develop this concept of privacy and the right to be let alone. And then we got to sort of where we are now, where they're monitoring everything. And it's sort of a crazy place that we got to now, because for a while, I just actually did a LinkedIn post on this. When we got to the digital age, we didn't really get to where we are currently, where there was sort of no privacy at all, where every single data point was being collected. We sort of had a functional privacy where Even though there were digital records out there, they weren't all aggregated. They weren't all sort of like weaponized. You couldn't just type in Jeff Jockisch and every single data point would pop up because the data brokers hadn't sort of like aggregated all those records and made them searchable. They still might have existed someplace. There was a public record for when I was born, what car I drove, what house I bought, things like that. But most of those records still existed, maybe in the government, maybe in a courthouse, maybe in a government database, right? But they weren't accessible publicly, right? But now, because of government transparency laws, because data brokers realize they can make a lot of money, they've aggregated all that information and made it accessible to the public, and sold all that information back and forth. So now it's very easy, right, for people to access either free or for very low amount of money. So if you sort of look at how this sort of changed over time, this is a very complicated chart. But if you look at just sort of like the yellow gold stuff down here in the bottom, since about 2000, we've seen these sort of trends where data breaches have really been increasing, right? And a lot of government spying and ransomware have just exploded, right? Back around 1970, we started getting sort of the digital age, PCs and the web and eBay and Google and Facebook and iPhone and big data and the Internet of Things, right? Now, all along this time, we've started to try to develop privacy laws to sort of combat some of this stuff. We started out with laws like the Fair Credit Reporting Act and the Privacy Act, which you may have heard some about in recent days. And the FERPA, which sort of covers educational records. That was sort of like the first wave. And then there was another wave where we did like HIPAA, which is healthcare privacy, and Gramm-Leach-Bliley, which is financial, and COPA, which is sort of children's privacy. But all of these laws were all very sort of siloed, right? They were about particular types of information. The US has never really done a comprehensive privacy law, unlike some other nations or Europe, right? That's sort of trying to change a little bit, like the states like California and now 19 other states have actually passed more comprehensive privacy laws, at least in those geographies, right? But we still don't have anything federally that does that for everyone, right? But the laws of the land are now getting more teeth. They're getting more comprehensive, and things are changing across the globe. The U.S. is frankly the only one who really hasn't really stepped up. Not the only one, but the only sort of major place. That's something we have to sort of come to grips with. Either we're going to be out of step, and maybe that's going to stay that way, or we have to sort of understand what the heck that means, right? Is that just because we're sort of okay with surveillance capitalism and we as citizens have to deal with it? I'm not really certain, right? But I think it's something we have to come to grips with, right? Because privacy is sort of key for democracy. And why is that really true? Well, really sort of three things, the way we sort of see it. One is it's pretty much key for freedom of expression and thought, right? Second is it's pretty key for government overreach to protect us from that. And third, it's sort of, well, it's very important for informed and autonomous decision making. Are we making our own decisions based upon facts and logic, or are we being guided to those decisions and votes and purchases that others want for us based upon, their ability to manipulate us? Right? We can go into all of those more, but I'm just trying to give you sort of a way to think about privacy before we go into the ways to reclaim that privacy. So let's talk about one more sort of big chunk of thinking about privacy, and then we'll go into the tactics, right? And so that's commercial surveillance, right? So how should we actually think about data brokers? Well, if you look at data brokers as compared to like a hairstylist, right? Hairstylists are, they're licensed, they're regulated in every state. They require training and licensing and sanitation and inspections, right? Data brokers, they're not completely unregulated. That's a little bit of an oversimplification, right? But there are very few limits on what they can do, right? We talked about some of the sort of silos. Okay, well, in the area of credit reporting, they have some limitations. Children's data, they have some limitations. Healthcare, they have some limitations. But to tell you the truth, right? There's zero federal privacy legislation. There's an exemption even in the laws like the Fair Credit Reporting Act. There's a huge loophole in there called the resellers exemption. So what that really means is that they can pretty much get around that entire law, right? Unless they're actually selling something that's labeled a credit report, they can essentially label the same chunks of data something else and resell it. So unless it includes actually a credit score and certain pieces of data, like certain pieces of financial information, all the same data gets bundled up by these guys and resold anyway, right? Even though it's effectively a credit report, or what we would a man on the street would consider a credit report, it's not actually covered by FACRA. The same sort of thing happens with HIPAA, which covers medical information, and Gramm-Leach, which covers financial information. Gramm-Leach may be a little bit less so, but there's all kinds of information that's technically medical and healthcare related information that's not covered by HIPAA because of the way the law is written, right? So if like a video game company collects a bunch of medical information and wants to sell it, right? Perfectly fine for them to do that because they're not a medical organization. It only covers healthcare organizations and their transaction of medical information. So HIPAA is sort of limited by the fact that it only covers certain organizations. If another organization outside of their coverage wants to sell medical information, completely free to do so. Gramm-Leach has some other limitations. COPA, right, which covers children's information, is great in that it's limiting how children's information gets sold and shared. The problem with COPA as it exists now is it requires companies to have actual knowledge. There's a loophole there, right? So let's say they have information of 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds. Well, it's okay for them to have that information, sell that information, share that information, as long as they don't actually know that those kids are 5 and 6 and 7 years old, right? Which is a huge problem, right? As long as they don't ask those kids how old they are, and they just, those kids just sign up for the service and don't tell them how old they are, it's not illegal. Crazy, right? There's another loophole in the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, which Congress passed specifically to keep the Department of Motor Vehicles from selling your data to data brokers, and yet virtually every state Department of Motor Vehicles sells that data and it goes to data brokers, if not directly, then indirectly. So all of your driver's license information gets to data brokers, even though there's a federal law that prohibits it, because there's a loophole. Essentially, there's a couple of loopholes, and essentially the data brokers attacked that and got some court cases that they won that allows them to grab that data regardless of the law. So data brokers are regulated, yes, but actually not, right? There's also a really huge loophole called publicly available data and a lot of privacy laws that essentially say that the publicly available data, or government data, as it's called in some laws, like data breach laws, are unaffected by privacy laws. So if a company says, well, the data that I have about Kelly is publicly available, then they don't have to delete it. So I could say, hey, go delete all this information about Kelly, Zoom info, and they say, sure, we'll delete all the information about Kelly, except for the publicly available data that we've collected on her, which is this huge file over here. That's pretty crazy, right? There's also a bunch of laws about data broker registration, which is awesome, except that until now, which is starting to happen in California and in Texas, there has been relatively zero enforcement of data broker registration laws. In other words, these laws require data brokers to register and tell the state who they are, pay some small fee, so at least we know who the hell they are. But up until this year, there's been no enforcement that these brokers actually have to register. Texas and the California Privacy Protection Agency has now started to enforce that and actually levy some fines. So there are those things. I won't go into these court cases because we're stretching a little bit longer. I want to make sure we spend at least 30 full minutes talking about the actual techniques of tactics of protecting your privacy. It's also a lot of ad technology. I'm not going to go through this slide here, but ad tech is a lot of the problems that we have with actually keeping our privacy. And there's also a lot of information that mobile ad tech collects, specifically through SDKs. And I want to point this out here. This is from a particular SDK. If you want to talk about this offline, I can actually tell you where this came from. But this is information that a single SDK can collect, right? If it's part of an app that's in your phone, and this is like only like one page of 18 that it actually could collect, right? So it can actually tell you if your headphones are connected, if you're in a vehicle, if you're at a bus stop, if the crowd around you is sparse or not, if the device you're holding is pointing up or down or in your pocket or next to your ear, if your cellular data is off or your Wi-Fi is connected, the status of your screen, if you're in a school, if you're running, if you're in an office, if you're sleeping, if you're having coffee, if you're in an airport, if it's raining around you, if you're under 18, if you're in a particular cohort, if you're female, right? Some of these are specific data points that it knows. Some of them are inferred, all kinds of information. But you can see how crazy, right, the information that these devices can acquire and infer about you. It knows virtually anything that it wants to know. And it can collect all this information. I mean, I have never seen any consent form on an app that I've installed that says, hey, I'm collecting all of this information. And I've never seen any consumer that understands this level of data collection is going on about them. There's another data breach that happened recently called the National Public Data Breach. I'm not sure if all of you are aware of it, but it's pretty massive. There was a secondary breach that was related to it. There's a lot of fallout, but essentially, I think something like 80% of the US was impacted here, and virtually all of our social security numbers were leaked. And this was based upon, this is why it's sort of important to understand, right? This was based upon one little company out of Florida that was run by a former law enforcement guy who was doing background checks. And he managed to accumulate something like, I don't know, several hundred million records, maybe 1 billion records that were used for background checks on all of us, right? And he didn't protect it very well. And so somebody hacked him, and now all of our data is in the dark web. There are literally hundreds of companies like his out there, all waiting to be breached. And there's virtually no regulation on these guys. That's seriously scary. And that's just one sector of data brokers, one small sector. Makes you wonder, right? Okay, so there are some more things that are happening. The FTC has been going after location data brokers. There's lots of stuff we could talk about location data and how scary that stuff is. I'm not going to really go into a lot of it. I think you guys probably understand how powerful location data is. Maybe you don't. Maybe we could go into that. I mean, we could spend a whole section just on location data, but you can see some actions that are being taken here by the FTC. A lot of car companies are now getting clamped down on for sharing location data. We did a bunch of studies of location data. And the location brokers, these are the ones that we identified just in North America about 1.5 years ago. And They track you in a lot of different ways. One of the ways that they grab that people didn't really realize is they actually grab your location from the real-time bid stream. So when you use your browser on a mobile device, it's actually leaking your location data there. And there was a study done by NOAB, which is a European organization for privacy. They found that on average in the US, our location gets exposed about 750 times a day just by the real-time bid system. That's not including all the apps that are getting rid of you, that are sharing your information, right? So this is essentially undisclosed location information. Also, other ways that it can get grabbed. People don't also realize that if you're sharing photos in social media, that the background information from your photos can give away your information, your location. The background information, right? The flora, the fauna, the architecture, the soil, all of the clues in these different pictures can give away where you are. People might think, oh, well, that's not enough to actually pinpoint where you are. We beg to differ. You can watch different videos from people that can analyze photos, and not just people. Now AI can look at some of these photos and say, actually, that's within a couple of miles of this particular location. So to be very careful when you share photos online, that you're not actually giving away your precise geolocation, if not your general geolocation. So I'm not going to probably go into this particular thing as deeply as I normally do, but when somebody knows your pattern of life, say they've got several different dots around, and they can actually they can understand the story of your life, right? So here you can actually see that this person went from here to here to here to here. They can actually start to not only see what your path is, right, but to actually build the story of your life from this, right? And they can infer things from that, right? So in this particular story, you might actually think that this person has a particular propensity to go to the bar every night and shop for marijuana and do other certain things, right? But the story that you're painting might be exactly the wrong story, because it might be something completely different, right? The inferences that these models make, or that people who are looking at this data makes, might be completely incorrect, right? The inferences are not always right. And these models are making inferences about us, and we don't even know what those inferences are, and they're not always correct. So we have to worry about, what these models are doing in the background and telling the world about ourselves, right? And how those things are influencing our credit scores, right? Whether we get a job, whether we get insurance, how much that insurance costs, and things like this. Because those things affect, financial status, religious status, health status, religious beliefs, political, personal privacy, accusations. There's more slides here than I remembered, but there's one final thing here that I want to show you here. So how does data actually flow? How does it get to a data broker? Here's an example where a student actually takes like a survey, right? Say they're going into college, they want to get like a scholarship, right? So they might take a survey. In this case, they took one from advisors, right? And then advisors sent that information to both Experian and ALC, all right? Now, Experian added a bunch of data. They sent it back to ALC. ALC sent it to Ethnic Tech. Ethnic Tech added some names and addresses. It predicted the ethnicity, the language, the religion. All that stuff went back to ALC. Then they repackaged it and sent it out to a marketer. The student, right, probably got something valuable. Maybe they got some feedback on whether or not they could get a particular scholarship or some ideas on scholarships, which is valuable, right? But what they didn't probably realize is their information is now with not only advisors, but also Experian and Ethnic Tech and ALC, and probably some slew of marketers, right, who are going to now contact them. So their information didn't just go to one company. It went to probably 12 or 50, right? That's how information proliferates through these ecosystems. It explodes. That's what scares me, right? There's all kinds of different data brokers. It's not just one, right? It's not just data broker. It's lots of different ones. We've created taxonomies that we don't think people understand data brokers particularly well. So we've started creating our own taxonomies to better understand them. It's about a $300 billion. That was actually from a year ago. It's actually heading toward 400 billion now. So let's talk about how we actually get people off the grid, right? First of all, we audit them to understand what their data footprint looks like. And then, right, we use that information to better wipe their data. Trying to just go to the data brokers and saying, hey, wipe my data doesn't really work particularly well. First of all, you have to understand all the selectors, right? Because if you just go to the data broker and say, wipe Mary and this email address and this phone number, that's not enough to do it. You actually have to tell the data broker explicitly all the different selectors to wipe, or they're not going to wipe the whole thing, right? Second of all, you have to actually know the full list of data brokers. So if you don't know all the data brokers, the wipe's going to be incomplete. So you have to know more than just a list of a few data brokers in order to make that work. And then you have to wipe deeply enough to make it effective, right? So then you have to actually plug the leaks though. So once you do the wipe, right, you've only gotten really sort of halfway there. You have to stop leaking data, right? So once we wipe your information, we can keep wiping it. We can keep watching it for it to pop back up. But if you continue to leak the data, right, you still got a problem, right? You have to stop leaking the data. And there are all kinds of different ways that they can leak from your phone, your car, your TV, your devices, right? So how does that actually work? We have 5 moves that we suggest everybody does to sort of block spies, trackers, and data brokers. And we're going to sort of walk through that here now, right? This is sort of our best advice. And we have this all in one PDF that we'll share with you. You can actually link it here. You can download this whole training session here. And the links are in here. It's also on our website if you're interested. We'll walk through sort of the overview of this. So the first thing is sort of to get privacy-focused communications. How much of these steps you do, all of these steps are valuable. You don't have to do all of them in order to be more private as a person. Frankly, just doing a couple are valuable, right? One that not everybody has to actually do, what we think is pretty valuable, especially if you're a high value target, is to get a privacy phone. So, but people always say like, well, what do I need to do? How private does my phone need to be? Well, we did a lot of research on this, and it's frankly a pretty complicated subject. I'm going to make this a little bit larger. So if you're looking for privacy, we actually have to break this out into sort of like levels of privacy and anonymity potential, right? Because if you think about privacy is sort of like, I think we actually have it sort of defined out here, right? So privacy is how well your device prevents leaks and tracking, right? Anonymity is how difficult is it to link the phone back to your actual identity, right? So those are two really different things. So like for instance, a Copperhead Pixel OS, right? Very high privacy, right? But, right, it's still tied to the Google hardware. So high privacy, but relatively low anonymity, right? Same sort of thing with some of these other solutions. So you have to sort of think about like, okay, what do you want? Like, well, let me actually think about like, let's say if you were to buy like a Purism, Libre 5 Purism, right? Very high privacy, not necessarily the absolute highest, right? But you're purchasing it from a vendor who's going to know your name, right? Now, these guys are relatively well trusted, so we didn't give them a low score, but they do know who you are, right? And so the supply chain exists, so you can be found out, right? You're not going to be able to necessarily erase your name from that company. So this is a great phone to get, but you're potentially, somebody's going to be able to trace you back unless you have somebody else go buy it for you, or you take additional steps to maintain your privacy. Does that make sense? When you start to look at these phones, right, is, let's say if you want to get like the absolute most privacy and anonymity, right? We can help you sort of build one, which is awesome, right? Extremely high levels of privacy and anonymity, right? But the ease of use and the ease of acquisition, extremely hard, right? So do you really want to do this? Because it's great, but actually getting one and then continuing to use it and maintain it, right? And maintain that level of privacy is extremely cumbersome. So we actually tell people you probably don't want to do this, right? Because you can't connect it to your home Wi-Fi. If you want to actually use it and maintain that level of privacy, you've got to like leave your house and go to someplace else to actually use it. To set it up, you've got to be extremely careful to make sure you set it up so that you've got that you maintain privacy. You can't connect it in all kinds of different ways. It's extremely complicated. So awesome in terms of privacy, not so awesome in terms of actually being able to actually then use that phone and maintain your privacy. Make sense?
Yeah, there's
so you
always
probably
this
want something.
balance. Sorry,
Yeah.
just there's
Go
always
ahead.
this balance when it comes to privacy with, how much inconvenience are you willing to accept, and are you willing to potentially change some of your actions. And I think that's always, with our clients, that's always kind of a discussion that we get into. Like we can take you as far as you need to go. But a lot of clients are trying to get the most value out of um, you know the most privacy with the least amount of inconvenience. And Jeff, you're 100% right that there's the solution, the top solution. While it definitely will provide you the best sense of privacy, it just can be a pain. So it just depends on what your personal preferences are, and also your threat level.
Yeah. I mean, unless you're actually James Bond, you probably don't want this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you probably want something down here where you want, ease of use and acquisition is much higher, right? I mean, a 5 and a 3.5, right? I mean, a Pixel with calyx, it still has, some issues, right? But that can be better, right? I mean, even these things here in the middle, right? I mean, uh, a custom iPhone, right, can be pretty awesome, right? I mean, it's got usability. It's not necessarily the absolute highest in privacy, but it can be very anonymous, and it's got good privacy, right? And you already know how to use it, right? So even though it's not even like it's sort of like upper or like lower middle on the list, right? That doesn't mean it's bad, right? I mean, it's something that you can use, right? And it's way better than just a normal iPhone, right? A stock iPhone is down here at 2 and 1. A custom iPhone is at 3 and 4. That's way better. So anyway, just to sort of give you an idea. So let's close this down and let's go a little bit further. So there's like custom phones, right? There's secure messaging apps, right? A lot of people still aren't using Signal or something better. If you look at custom messaging apps, right? Signal is actually here at a 5 and a 2, right? So it's extremely high privacy, but right, you actually have to give it a phone number in order to connect it, right? So the anonymity of Signal is not particularly good, even though it's what everybody's using. There are better solutions, Session and Matrix, for instance, and there are some others that we didn't even list here, right? The problem with these is nobody's actually using them, right? So in order to get your network, right, the people you actually want to talk to use them, you got to get them to load session or matrix, which could be hard, right? So we still recommend Signal, even though it's not necessarily the best in terms of anonymity, right? So there's always a trade-off when you're looking at this stuff. We would be remiss if we didn't say be careful with things like WhatsApp, right? Not only is WhatsApp actually a problem here, but if you're using the Google ecosystem, Google just changed some of their parameters, and they're actually scanning WhatsApp now, apparently for using the Gemini AI is actually scanning WhatsApp messages, not to necessarily read them, but to train their AI, which is pretty crazy concept. Apparently you can turn that off, but it's not necessarily easy or straightforward. So you got to be really, really careful with how this kind of stuff works, right? I'm not sure why they wouldn't necessarily try to scan the Signal messages if they could get to them, but maybe Signal's blocking that somehow. Anyway, something to consider, right? These new AI systems that are getting integrated into all of our devices are going to be a real problem for privacy in a number of ways, including just trying to scan everything that we're doing on our devices, which is maybe another reason to consider using a different type of phone or a different OS on our phones. Let's go to the next sort of step here. We're only got 15 minutes left. Protecting your financial data. You hear this all the time, but the reason you hear it is because it's really important. Freeze your credit. Sorry, I went to the next slide. People sort of don't do this because they think it's going to be hard, or they think it's going to be hard to unfreeze, but it really does protect you. If somebody steals your identity, the first thing they're going to do is try to actually take out credit in your name. And if you freeze your credit, it makes it much harder. Now, there are identity thieves that actually have gone to credit bureaus and unfrozen your credit to be able to do this, but it's much harder for them to do that if you've frozen it in the first place. So you should do this. It's easy to do. We can give you instructions. There are instructions in our guides on how to do this, right? You should do that. Another thing that we recommend, we actually have a full guide on how to do that, is buy a separate laptop and use it as your financial laptop. Put a firewall between all of your financial transactions and everything else that you do in your life, because your PC or your phone has all the stuff that you're doing, right? And you're exposing it to viruses and attack and all kinds of things just by doing what you do in your normal life. But if you have a separate device over here that sort of has a firewall between all of that crap, right? And only use this for visiting your banking website, right? And your crypto and whatever you do, right? Just those financial, services things, right? You never use it for email. You never use it for cruising the web. You never use it for anything. You never load anything else on that. Only use it for those particular websites, right? Then your risk of having something bad happen on that device, right, is virtually, not zero, but it's much, much lower, right? So that's what we recommend. You can buy a Chromebook for a couple $100, just use that for that. And we got a guide on how you can use that and even avoid the whole Google ecosystem, even though you're on a Chromebook, right? Very good. You can also use virtual credit cards. There's a couple of ways you can do that. Privacy.com is one way. They've actually changed their name. It's now, you can still get to it by privacy.com, but they've got a new branding, I think. But what these things do, virtual credit cards, is allow you to create a different credit card number that's like a sub number off of your account, and it can have like a limited credit limit. Say your credit limit's $10,000, you can give this a credit limit of 500 or 1,000, right? And you can turn it off at any time, so you can use it for a single transaction or just one particular transaction that's recurring. right? And then if somebody steals that number and tries to use it for something, it's sort of a throwaway card, right? Very valuable. We've also got guides like this one for getting your money when you go off grid. So if you got to run, or if you're overseas and you need to get money, right? We've got a whole guide on how you can get your money without people following you, right? Or knowing that you're grabbing your money, how you can set up a foreign LLC, how you can use different, fintech tools to get your money without essentially alerting data brokers, right? Different ways that you can do that. So sort of valuable, depending upon what your goal is. Also, how to use privacy first browsers. You should not be using Chrome at this point. Chrome, especially with their latest manifest version 3 changes, are really bad. So you want to be using something else. Here's our analysis of what you should be using. Brave is probably the best. You'll notice here it does not have the best anonymity, but it has the best, for cyber exploit resilience and customization, things like this. But you can sort of pick for yourself based upon what fits your use case, right? Mulvad is something that a lot of people love. Libre Wolf is another good solution. Tor is an awesome solution in a lot of ways, right? But it also breaks a lot of the sites that you use. So, it's probably not going to be good for using banking sites or things like that, right? DuckDuckGo is also pretty good in a lot of use cases, but it sort of depends upon usage. We've also got a whole separate guide for mobile web browsers. So it's different on mobile than it is on desktop. So take a look at this and you can probably improve what you want. There's also sort of a summary down here, sort of based upon your use case. So are you looking for overall privacy? Are you looking for casual privacy? Are you an advanced user, right? What are you actually looking for? We sort of give you, what you should be looking for. If you're a privacy focused user or a corporate user, are you a casual user who just wants a little bit more privacy? We've got some pretty good suggestions, we think. You also, there are some privacy experts that say don't use a VPN. You're just giving up your data to another company. We don't subscribe to that logic. Here's the thing, right? So VPNs do route your information through another company, and that other company does have the ability to track you, right? However, right, what you're doing by putting your information through a VPN is keeping it from your telecom provider. Your telecom provider, is tracking you and selling that data, including your geolocation. What the VPN does, assuming you use a reputable one that's using no tracking, like any of the ones we recommend, and there's a slew of good ones, but you're going to have to pay to get a good one. You can't use a free VPN. Those guys will sell you out every time. Assuming you're using a good VPN that's using no save logs, they will keep your telecom provider from essentially aggregating all of your information and selling it. They're still going to aggregate some information, but they're going to get a lot less information because you're using a VPN. And a lot of that information is going to be geolocation, which they're no longer going to be able to aggregate and sell. Right? We know they're selling this. They've already been sued, right? And they're fighting that lawsuit, even though they've essentially lost and admitted that they're selling your geolocation. So use a VPN. Even if you don't care about where you're going online, you should be using a VPN anyway. You should also use secure DNS. Most people haven't heard of this, but it's really valuable. It's another way to sort of keep bad guys out of your stuff, right? And then finally, there's two other ones. There's also managing permissions, which is essentially keeping social apps and other folks from being able to track you. We recommend Block Party. We've also got a whole article on how you can create sock puppets so that you, if you want to use Twitter or Blue Sky or any of those kind of social apps, how you can create a sock puppet account, an account that's not connected back to your real identity, so that if you want to say something but you don't want to be outed as to who you are, you can actually do that with relative impunity. But realize that if you don't take a lot of care in creating these accounts, people like Colby will track your butt back and figure out who you are, because a lot of people do it poorly.
Yeah, I highly recommend. Yeah, I highly recommend actually following that guide. So Jeff did a fantastic job of putting that together, testing out a lot of different things, and yeah, having sock puppet accounts, I think at this point is highly recommended. You can go as far as to setting up a complete virtual machine that has each of the sock puppets loaded onto it. So say if it's in your browser cookies, or if you have a password manager on that VM, that's always really, probably one of the better ways to go about doing that, to further obscure who you actually are.
Oops. Got something popping up here. Probably don't want to look at that while I'm doing presenting here. I'm going to skip that for the moment. I don't know if I can. I think I can hide this. Hopefully I'm not turning off the session here, right? Good. Okay.
Yep, good.
Huh. Okay, just two final things here. It's also, you can become harder to track by using unique names and email addresses for different accounts. Remember how we talked about data brokers are going to track you by aggregating information around your phone numbers, your names, your email addresses, right? Things like that. Well, you can create different email addresses, different phone numbers, different things like that. The first thing to do, obviously, is to get better email addresses, because most accounts aggregate around email. So we've got a whole guide on how to pick a better private email address, right? But there's also ways that you can go further than that with things like MySudo, which will create like a whole separate identity. Cloaked also has a solution there. And there are a few other ways that you can do that as well. We don't have time to go into that now because we're almost done here. But there's lots of ways that you can do that. We highly recommend you consider that. And then finally, we didn't cover it in that there, but it is covered in the full 5-step guide, and that is making sure that you're managing your passwords and two-factor authentication well. So I just want to show you real quick, right? Even if you're using length is the most important thing for your password. So if you use this, like this top thing here, if you use like star C @D1Y, this complicated password, that one is relatively easy to crack, 34,000 years. That might sound like a lot, but it's actually not, right, in today's computational age, right? But if you make like a longer one, right, in that same vein, 42 quintillion years. Sounds like a lot, right? But still maybe not a whole lot. But if you actually use a passphrase, right, Denver, Young Jeezy, Pegleg, right, just the length of that alone, right, makes it actually almost the same, complexity as this hard to understand one is, right? So the point here is that passphrases that are long are easier to remember and more complex, right? And if you add a couple of numbers or dashes into it, right, it becomes incredibly complex and a much better password. So passphrases are way better to use. Now, there's another way that you can do this. Sometimes you don't have like a passphrase generator or a password manager ready. We highly recommend a password manager. We have another concept that you can use called an echo key, right? And so let's say you don't have your password manager available and you got to come up with a quick password really quickly. You can use an echo key, right? And the idea here is you come up with a really quick word, right? So let's say you come up with the word Alabama or Jimmy Hoffa or River Run or sunshine, right? all you have to do, right, is create a little rule like 3 times the vowel and add your age, right? So if you multiply each vowel, so instead of A, it's AAA and AAA and AAA. I mean, this works on Alabama a lot because it's got a lot of A's, right? But if you do that, right, now you know the password is Alabama and it's triple the A's, and then you add 44 on the end, right? That becomes now, I don't know, 2 trillion. It's not trillion. I don't even know how many years that is, right? That becomes a very strong password, right? You can do the same kind of thing, right? If you take Jimmy Hoffa and you double all the consonants and add a 38, right? And you can create these little rules, right? So that you take a very simple password, one that you can remember, right? And a rule, and now you've got a complicated password. It's a really cool way that I've started using. So whenever I don't have a password manager, or if I've got some other way to do it, it's a pretty great way to generate a quick password. So anyway, that's some quick tactical privacy things. And we hope you've enjoyed this. Sorry we didn't have a lot of time for questions here. We're going to have to do another one where we just take some audience questions. In fact, we're going to stay on. If you have some questions that we have from the audience, we can answer those. Do we get any questions coming in, Colby?
So from the Riverside chat, I'm not seeing anything.
Right, check the LinkedIn chat if we have anything.
Yeah, I didn't check the LinkedIn chat. I think there might be some though.
I would, except that'll just like throw me. I mean, we'll be. I'm not sure if I want to do that while I'm presenting here.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Okay. All right. Let me see here. Yeah. So here we have a question from Brian. So he asked, "Where can I access these nifty standard sheets? I like to share with my network." So Ryan, what we can do is, I will get the URL for this for the sheets that Jeff was showing. This is on our website.
Yeah, you can actually go to this URL up on our website under I need help. There is a all do-it-yourself guides to privacy. You can get it there. We're going to be redoing our website here in the next month, so it's going to be a lot easier to find. But under there is a whole slew of guides that we have here, including all the ones that I just showed you.
Yep, and for everybody, I posted the URL that Jeff is showing you in the chat here in LinkedIn.
We're going to also, after this is up, we're going to post the link to the whole presentation here, and the presentation actually has links embedded into for all of these pieces. Like we didn't actually look at the private email one, but this one here shows you, like if you're looking for anonymous email alias and forwarding services, here's this. If you want temporary email services, there's this. If you want a long-term private email account, here, these are what we recommend. So, yeah, I mean, people don't really even think about it, right? I mean, everybody thinks like, okay, well, there's email and there's not, right? There's actually what we think of as 3 different types of email services. There's like the long-term email that you think about, like, okay, replacing my day-to-day email. And then there's like email forwarding, or if you just want like an alias for an email, right? So like simple login will let you create an alias. So you could I could create like Jeff at something.com, right? And it would just forward to my normal Jeff at ObscureIQ or a Jeff at protonmail.com, right? So it's not actually an email. It's just a an alias for an email. And these services do that really well, right? But then there may be something like, maybe I want to sign up for some service and I don't think that I'm going to like it, or I just want to I want to sign up for to go to this training session, but I don't want to give them out a real email address. I only need to, it's only going to last for like an hour, right? Just so I can sign up for something. And then I don't want to get any spam from those guys, right? Well, that works, right? It may not work for something that needs to last for like a week or a month, right? So maybe you have to be careful, right? Like these 10-minute emails won't necessarily work for everything, but they can be good for some things. So anyway, that's it for that. All kinds of stuff. We're always available for quick chats. We also have like a 15-minute privacy session you can set up with us. We're always willing to talk to potential clients. So if you got any kinds of questions, give us a ping. We can set up a call. So glad to have you guys today, and hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.